In the mid-80s, a new trend popped into the music world. Slowed-down beats, acoustic guitars, and soft vocals were featured on many new songs by bands that would normally be described as hard and heavy. The trend, which was embraced without much reservations by fans of mainstream rock, seemed to have seeped through to some of the heaviest metal bands of the time, which was in stark contrast to everything those bands have done prior. But the hardcore fans were now calling their favorite band's artistic integrity into question, and some, fans and bands alike, were accusing the record labels of sullying their catalogs with contrived cash grabs. How did this trend develop? How involved were the record labels, and what was the impact of those songs on the bands? In this video, we'll discover how ballads influenced metal. The term power ballad had been thrown around by music fans since the 70s, with bands like Styx, Journey, Queen, and the Eagles all playing part in popularizing it. But when metal bands started experimenting with ballads in the 80s, no one really knew what to expect. Leading the charge were the glam metal bands, which were already established in the mainstream. So established, in fact, that around 1985, Whitesnake were asked to write a song for Tina Turner. When they turned up with the song Is This Love, the label changed their mind and said, "You're f***ing keeping it," and the rest was history. But while the song was breaking records in the US, Whitesnake were accused by their countrymen in the UK of selling out. And they weren't the only ones whose creative integrity was questioned, as the creation of ballads was sometimes driven by outside influence. This was the case for Def Leppard. While recording their fourth album Hysteria, their producer brought in a country ballad to their sessions, and the band was taken aback. But after adding their own touch to it, it turned into what we now know as Love Bites. In other instances, ballads were written and advocated for by the bands themselves, and it was the producers who were pushing back. When Queensryche was making Silent Lucidity, their own producer insisted on shelving it. But when the record label brought in Michael Kamen to write the orchestration, everything fell into place. However, when the song became a hit, the band had a difficult time adjusting to their new status.
Well, I'll put it this way. I am now what I used to hate.
This inspired a follow-up album that was so dark that it had alienated many of their new fans. So while ballads appealed to a wider audience and helped drive album sales, it didn't always translate into a loyal following of the band's main style of music. A notable example of that is Skid Row. When they came out with their ballad 18 in Life, it was an instant hit. Following it up with the popular and even more successful single I Remember You, they were able to sell over 5 million copies of their debut in America. But when their second album displayed a harsher sound and didn't produce any hits, the band was quickly forgotten by the mainstream. With glam metal bands seeing much success, the trend spread to the heavier genres, and even thrash metal bands like Testament and Death Angel were now producing ballads of their own. Leaving their glam days behind, Pantera was one of those heavier bands. Managing to incorporate their regular style and lyrical themes into it, Cemetery Gates was received well by both the mainstream and the hardcore metal crowd. Other bands, however, chose to drift farther away from their usual style, which proved a blessing and a curse. One such example is the band Extreme. While the band saw moderate success with their patented mix of funk and glam metal, that style took a backseat on their ballad titled More Than Words. The song became a huge pop hit and over time had overshadowed the popularity of the band itself, as the rest of their catalog did not appeal to their new fans, and over time the band grew resentful of the ballad. The success of ballads in the metal world prompted some record labels to heavily encourage them. When Dream Theater were recording their second album, the band originally had a different song lineup in mind. The label, however, chose to wait until more songs were written, and when the band came up with a couple of ballads, they seized the opportunity. However, things didn't go according to the label's plans.
Another Day was the song with the most MTV potential, and so it was the song that potentially never made MTV.
Indeed, it was a heavier song named Pull Me Under that blew the doors open for them.
It just goes to show you, balls and chunk is where it's at.
But not every ballad at the time was a result of record label intervention. When James Hetfield was homesick during a Metallica tour, he would often rely on an acoustic guitar for company. When a particular tune hit his bandmate Lars's ears, the drummer suggested they record it on their next album. The result was entirely unexpected. The immaculate success of Nothing Else Matters, along with other dark ballads showcased by the thrash metal scene, were enough to convince even the most stubborn of people to embrace the trend.
Don't remember where I was. I realized life was a game.
When Megadeth released A Tout Le Monde, they were likely hoping for a similar effect to their peers. But with lyrics that could be perceived as a promotion of self-harm, it was banned from MTV, and the band's chances of giving Metallica a fair fight were squashed. Fast forward to the 2000s and power ballads were once again in the limelight, now driven by the new metal wave. Bands like Incubus, Slipknot, and System of a Down were massively successful with their own respective hits.
Such a lonely day, and it's mine.
The same was true for post-grunge and alternative metal bands like Seether, Alter Bridge, and also Stone Sour, whose hit single Through Glass was, ironically enough, about the vanity and shallowness of mainstream music at the time. And even in the 2010s, some metal bands were able to strike gold with ballads such as What If I Was Nothing by All That Remains. The song, which turned out to be a massive hit, was initially seen by the band as a gamble, and multiple band members opposed it, perhaps due to stylistic preference, and perhaps due to the reputation of ballads as a creative compromise. Sidestepping this problem elegantly, the band Disturbed chose to cover The Sound of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel some 50 years after the original came out. The cover, which was endorsed by Paul Simon himself, went on to become a huge hit and the single most watched music performance on Conan O'Brien ever, showing that ballads may still have a place in metal to this day. No matter how you feel about ballads, it's undeniable that they can be effective in drawing in new audiences. How likely those new listeners are to make the leap into the metal world seems to depend on the nuances of the song. Quite often, it can come at the cost of hardcore fans, and sometimes even cause a band to lose its way. But every now and then, when the right chord is struck, it can even pierce through to the hearts of the biggest cynics and create a timeless gem that leaves no eye dry. If you'd like to learn more about the bands mentioned in this video, like Queensryche, Dream Theater and others, check out our documentaries on this channel. And if you'd like to see our upcoming documentaries on Megadeth, Pantera and System of a Down, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon for notifications. And last but not least, thank you to our patrons for helping us sustain the channel. If you'd like to help us out, head over to patreon.com/Raz Ben Ari. Until next time.